So how can you figure out if you're a good communicator or not? Usually it's around the type of language that you're using. So when you have feedback to give to somebody, or you have a tricky conversation or a request for something, are you using neutral language? Are you making requests rather than demands? Are you making observations rather than judgments? Are you making statements rather than accusations? So these kind of things, kind of pulling from, a vocabulary style that takes the judgment and emotion out of these conversations and keeps it very clean and collaborative. And are you, the second thing I think to say is, are you putting thought into these conversations before they happen? And are you doing that from an empathy-led approach that also considers how your message might land with someone else?
I really like these examples that you just provided with the two different sides of how a situation could be approached. Are there any examples that you could share with some practical kind of situations that you go through with some of the people you are coaching with?
Yeah, one of the schools of thought that I pull from when working specifically on challenging conversations is something called nonviolent communication. And this was created by someone called Marshall Rosenberg. And it's a framework to kind of understand conversations, particularly conflict-based conversations, and break poor communications and kind of like move into a more adult way of operating. And at the core of NVC, it says what happens is we have a judgment cycle. And if it's helpful, I can kind of share my screen briefly here and talk to this. But it says that we go through 4 stages when we're in conflict with people. The first is that we observe something. So the observation, let's say for the purpose of this conversation, is say I've come onto this podcast with you and I'm sharing some information, and then perhaps your phone rang, and you paused for a moment and went on your phone. So that's stage 1. That's the observation. The second stage is then maybe I have a feeling, I have an emotional response to that, and I might be hurt or frustrated. And the third stage is I have a judgment, an internal judgment. Is like, he's not interested in me. So then the next becomes a punishment or reward action. So I might say, fine, I'm going to disengage with him because he's not listening. And then if we're considering the cycle, we go back to stage 1. You then see me ignore you. That's your observation. You then feel frustrated. You then have a judgment, which is something along the lines of, well, he's clearly not interested in this podcast. Then maybe you have a punishment or reward action, which is like, fine, I'm going to end the podcast. And then I see you the end of the podcast, and we go round and round the judgment cycle. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Really easy to map any conflicts to this. You see it escalate through this. So what NVC says is that once you notice your feeling, you then come in and rather than pass a judgment, you look at yourself and go, okay, what is it I need right now? Okay, what's not here? What's the basic need that I have? So let's say you were called off on your phone, rather than me casting a judgment and then having a kind of default reaction, what do I need? Maybe I just need some awareness of what's happening. Or maybe I need commitment. So my request for you then to try and break that cycle is just to say, okay, when I noticed you on that phone, I felt a little bit frustrated because I thought we were committed to this podcast. So I have a request. Can I request that for any future recordings, we both have our phones turned off or something like that, So the idea is that we go from reactive and subconscious behavior that escalates to bringing conscious and awareness to it and saying, what do I need? And making a clear request and then moving forward from there. And that's one thing that often acts as a really good basis for understanding communication, which we can start mapping case studies to whatever they may be. Yeah.
That's a good one. In theory, it sounds awesome, and I'm sure a lot of CTOs are now wondering, okay, how do I apply this in practice? Because I really like the concept, but next time I'm in a meeting room and the cell phone rings again, I'll have this emotional reaction. So how to systematically remove the judgment from our lives?
Well, the first is to become aware of why we feel the certain way that we feel. The second, I think, is to become aware of how conflict escalates. And one thing that I look into for this is, have you heard of the pack model, which is part of transactional analysis?
No, no, I don't recall.
No, great. So transactional analysis, this is great. This blew my mind when I first discovered it many years ago and often does. So it's a communication framework created by a psychologist called Eric Byrne, and it helps us understand how and why we communicate in certain ways. And I'll just share my screen very quickly to, does that work on the podcast if I do a share screen?
Yeah,
Is that
yeah,
okay?
of course. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. So you can see it here. And what the model says is that as we are working our way through work, through life, through our day to day, we operate in one of three places, okay, when we communicate with other people. We either are in what we call parent state, okay, which shows up as being really nurturing. I'm going to support you. I'm going to make sure everything's okay. I'm going to hold you. Or it's very critical. That's not good. I do not like this. You've got this wrong. Okay. And then we have child state. And child is either, the people pleaser, go quiet, be really compliant. I'm going to do what you say. It's okay. I'm not going to do this. Or actually, no, it's quite rebellious, like the teenager maybe kind of coming out here. But then in the middle, we have this adult state, which is objective, impartial, neutral. Now, when we move into conflict, and I'll challenge you to have a little reflection on this as well, is what tends to happen, what triggers conflict is that for a million and one reasons that we're not going to unpack here on this podcast, is we tend to enter into these high pressured situations as either an adult or a child.
Hmm.
So we go in thinking like, right, we're going to have to criticize this, or we don't like it, or whatever. What that does to the other person is will nearly always trigger the opposite. But they will naturally move into child mode. Either they'll get defensive and rebellious, or they'll become really compliant and just try to please. Okay, you making sense so far?
Makes sense, totally.
You can see this everywhere. You see this at home, in
Yeah.
relationships,
Yeah.
in families, in the workplace. Likewise, if you've, let's say, as a CTO, you have to present something up to your senior leadership, a case, perhaps a business case for change or a tool or whatever it may be, and you have a history of working with quite a tricky leadership team that perhaps are quite critical, then you may naturally be trained to act a bit like a child in those situations. You might already be coming in a little bit worried and really hoping they sign it off, or feeling really rebellious. And if you start from that space, again, that means the response you're likely to get is one of a parent. Okay. So the goal here is say, okay, right, in those moments, how do we shift to adult? And if we come in and role model and be the person to use adult language, we're more likely to get an adult response. This is where some of the NVC language comes into it. So first of all, being aware of this and planning for it. And then the second is being okay to kind of name things. And it's naming what you see rather than what you feel or judge. So when I see you pick up that phone, yeah, I feel a bit frustrated because what I need actually is security or confidentiality on this call or whatever it may be. So right now, would you be willing to put the phone down and we can make a plan to continue to commit to this or whatever it may be?
Mhm.
As opposed to using language which is you're being rude by picking up your phone, or I feel angry at you and you have been disloyal to me. Do you see what I mean? Then that brings in the kind of language that triggers things, and then you get that spark that sets it
Mm.
off and you have to bring it down.
Yeah. Or in the worst case, there is no communication at all. Just the person gets annoyed, frustrated, and goes into some silent disagreement or angerness.
Moves into freeze mode.
Yeah.
Yeah. So fight, flight, or freeze is what
Mm.
tends to happen there. And yeah, people close up. And that in itself is it's actually a protective mechanism that's learnt.
Mm.
So for at some point in that person's history, for those of us that freeze and go quiet, that method has helped them
Mm.
historically at some point. It's protected them.
Mhm.
But what I see more and more with the rise of this work is people are going, okay, that's not actually helping me anymore.
Mm.
I need to be able to hold my voice. I need to be able to make this case. I need to get the business better because I know what's right. I'm just struggling to have these conversations and I'm
Mm.
not being heard. So it's about changing that and channeling and empowering the person with the tools, and the confidence to do that.
Yeah. And speaking of tools, how long does it take for someone to start using these frameworks or methods at work in practice in daily life? Because the model sounds great. I can imagine I walk out of this room and maybe I'll apply it once or twice, but then I'll get into the standard way of living, and probably tomorrow I'll not remember this anymore. What are the most efficient ways to embrace this as a part of the life and ensure that this is the new benchmark?
Yeah, so this is where you're talking about integration, how to integrate things, and there's a number of ways that this can happen. Depending on how you come into these models, I suppose there's two angles that we can come at this from. The first is like, generally speaking, how do you really integrate this work? And then the second is, what can we give your listeners on this call something quite quickly that they could use and integrate? And they're two quite different things, where we've only got an hour together. So I'll start with the kind of bigger piece around like integration, and then we can have a think about what's like a tangible we can give to your users on the call.
Mm-hmm.
So with any communication work, it requires practice. Okay. And it requires ongoing practice. This is why, anybody who's into this, I would suggest, firstly, like, don't go it alone. Find someone else that you do this work with, whether it's a team member, whether it's a buddy, whether it's a coach, or whatever it might be, so that you have that ongoing support. The second is buy the materials that lay out a timeline for you to do things on. You can use smart objectives or action learning sets, this, that, and the other, to kind of self-coach yourself to keep trying these things. Journal and reflect. So I always encourage my clients to log what I call their light spots and their dark spots on a weekly basis. Light spot being where they've had a communication situation that they felt went well for them. Jot that down in a diary. And a dark spot being a communication situation that didn't go well. Jot that down in the diary and make that a habit. And then what you start to do is surface evidence of where your strengths naturally sit, and then perhaps where there's some growth areas for you to start focusing on and start to build up that self-awareness. Second thing, quite practical, that people can do is, let's say we're aware that there's a parent, child, and adult dynamic. I kind of get what that is. I know that a parent can be critical or nurturing. I know a child can be rebellious or over compliant, whereas an adult is completely impartial and just present. So I've got that awareness now. What can I do with that? Start intention setting before meetings. So with this awareness, say, okay, for this meeting, I'm going to make an intention to do one thing differently, and make it a habit to set an intention before every meeting you go into. It may be that for this meeting, my intention might be to listen, or to ask a question, or to just observe and see if I see PAC, parent, adult, child, playing out at all, and start to just coach yourself into action, not thought, action that starts to develop your skills in this space. So I think those are the two areas that I would share there. So set intentions, understand the framework, find a buddy to do this, think about action learning sets, and be smart in your objectives.
Awesome. I guess I'll start with this as well. I like this intention setting before each meeting. That's a great one, very actionable. What about some other aspects of the communication and speaking? CTOs must often present in front of the other stakeholders or in front of the IT team. They may often feel not confident in the all hands meetings to present. What are some ways how to overcome the fear of public speaking and eventually become a professional presenter?
Yeah, so this is, even though the challenging conversations has risen, this is where the bulk of support I get requested for comes from. It is about presenting, whether that's sprint reviews, pitches, new technical presentations, business cases, leadership's clients, a lot. And nerves are a big factor that come up for people. This tends to show up as them feeling maybe that they're not good enough, they haven't got the skills, or they get quite anxious and their nervous system kicks in, the adrenaline rises, the heart rate raises, all these kind of things. And in order to tackle that, there's a few things that kind of come up, and it's some people think it's just about working on mindset. Some people think about it's just working on skills, but it's actually the two kind of interplay quite closely. I could share another slide, and the model that I use to look at how to grow confidence. It's actually the Dunning-Kruger curve, which you may or may not have come across. I'll share my screen quickly again just to speak through this, because I think I share it with an awful lot of folks in the tech space. So this is the model. So this is a simple model from the world of neuroscience. It's a relationship between confidence and experience. Okay. And, there's two ways in which you can read this model. The first most popular way that people read this model is that when you first get stuck into something brand new, you think you know everything and your confidence is really high in it. But then when you become aware actually of the full scope of it, your confidence drops. And for any CTOs listening here, I'm sure their confidence is very high because they've gone through this whole program. Maybe when they first got into coding, they were like really excited about it and kind of hoovering it all up and and then they suddenly realized how wide a world this is. The confidence drops, but over time, they develop their skills. They go to workshops, they go to conferences, they test stuff, they pivot, they're agile, release, etc., etc. And years pass and they come up the other side and they're really solid and they're confident in the space. The second way to look at this model, and I find this particularly useful with public speaking, is that if your confidence is low, as you said here, maybe the CTOs on the call that, lack confidence to stand up for a number of reasons and deliver their message. If you continue bringing conscious action, not thought, thinking never led to a change in behavior, action does. If you continue bringing conscious action to this topic, you will come up the other side. Okay. So the way I work, the belief that I have is like the goal is to push people along this line as quickly as possible. Okay. And that's a mixture of practical work that then helps build the mindset piece as well. Confidence is one of the big traps that people fall into is they say, oh, I'm not going to do this thing until I feel confident enough. Okay. And then you create distance between where you are now and where you want to be. But confidence isn't an overnight switch. It's a felt sensation that comes from experience. Okay. So the goal is actually how do you create lots of small steps that you taste success with that you then realize suddenly, oh my gosh, I'm halfway up this hill already, And for me, the pillars really that make up this, there's kind of 6 really clear pillars that work. Number 1 is understanding how to prepare your content and rehearse, and getting into your body really quickly. What I see all the time is that people spend 3 or 4 weeks tinkering with a PowerPoint, and then they do a quick run through the day before and wonder why it feels weird. So bring that online at the beginning and bring your rehearsal and your preparation together. So get into the body quickly. Number 2 is take control of the situation. I lose so many hours with simple things that people don't think about till the end. And then they fire off their emails to the organizers going, oh, what time have I got to arrive? Or when do you need slot? All that stuff. Make a list of all the things you don't know about this event, everything, and then go and get the answers. Okay, close down all the unknowns. And then you'll have a sense of security around the fact that nothing's going to catch you off guard because you've done your homework. Number 3 is think about how you're using stories. I know it's a cliche, but everyone has a natural storytelling style inside of them. Okay. Start exploring your relationship to films and to books and look at the structures that excite you. And if you like stories that are quite fast paced and have big key moments and have senses of conflict, how could you metaphorically pull on that when you're crafting your presentations? Have you got big moments in your presentation? Have you got opposing points of view? Or are you going with really linear stuff that's not actually in line with your own style? And then be thinking about your body. When I take people through my programs, this is usually when the big shift comes. When we say, okay, right, let's think a little less about the what, which is your content, and a little bit more about the how. So can you overlay your delivery with an emotion of some sort, passion, inspiration, confidence, assuredness, and see how that augments your body language, your tone of voice? And I think the biggest piece of guidance that tends to shift people the most is becoming comfortable with silence. Okay. In public speaking, silence is power. And if you can be comfortable with being silent for a few seconds in front of a room, you can regulate your nervous system. You can choose exactly what you want to say next. You can take control of your brain if you have a brain freeze and just be okay. And once you get comfortable with that, there's always when I see people suddenly unlock. It's like,
Mm.
okay, I've had this moment where I've gone up here and I've had a panic. I don't expose it. I just, okay, I'm back and I move on.
Mm.
And that's golden.
Yeah, well, it's really difficult with those silences. Even now on the podcast, it's the room is not full. We are just, the two of us here,
Yeah,
and
this is true.
it's it's hard to be silent.
It is. And what's interesting is when, if I may ask you a question, what is it you find hard about being silent?
Well, I guess what people think during the 1 or 2 seconds or 3 or 5 when the silence occurs, and it could be the fear of them thinking that I don't know what to say.
And so is that something that you believe they think, or is that just what we would call a projection of your anxiety onto them?
Yes, that's the projection of my anxiety.
Yeah. And have you ever watched a speaker that inspires you who very well uses pauses and silence? And whenever you have those pauses and silence, what happens in your mind in those moments? If you've just
Hmm.
heard an incredible message and then you get a 2 second breathing space, what goes through your mind?
Yeah, that's a good point. For me, it's an opportunity to think and digest the message,
Yeah.
but also I'm thinking about the speaker as a professional who knows what to say and rehearse the speech. So in such case, I would not feel that he doesn't know how to continue. But if it's just me, the not professional speaker in front of a full room, probably that's where
Yeah,
the anxiety comes from.
definitely. And this is where reframing is really powerful. And this is a big part of some of the mindset work we look at is becoming aware that how we see ourselves is very different to how others see us, and usually acutely different. And once we realize, this is what I say about the feedback piece, it's like, okay, you can't just judge yourself on your own performance. You need to get external validation based on what people say, how they look, whether they're present, what your feedback is afterwards, and start seeing all the evidence. Because often how we think we come across is not how other people see us.
Hmm.
Uh, and, I think you probably agree with me this actually, when you hear someone speak carefully and considered, and with a good use of control, you feel like that person's in control.
Hmm.
But when they
Totally.
come across really quickly like this and they're filling the air and it's all coming out and they're trying to be fast, actually, that's a little bit chaotic.
So
Um,
true. So true.
and I know which one lands better for me. So this is always where I take my clients. It's like, let's slow down, let's get in control.
Yep.
And then that way you will control your audience as well as your message.
Hmm.
We don't want to sprint. We
Yeah.
want to carefully walk all the way through this presentation and
Hmm.
know exactly where every step is going and how it's going to
Hmm.
avoid the potholes which come when you run.
Awesome. So these CTOs, they often have stand-ups or some smaller presentations in front of 3, 5, 7, 10 people. So do you suggest that they use these small events, team meetings as opportunities to practice silence?
Yes.
It was 3 seconds of silence on my end, and it was super painful.
I think
It's
I have a client that I've recently been working with, Hollywood producer actually, and she works in the kind of tech and animation side of things, and that's a pretty cutthroat industry to work into, especially when you're pitching to quite a male dominated audience. And seeing the results that have come from actually going, it's okay just to let everyone else get off their chest what needs to get off the chest and then responding rather than reacting in the moment has paid dividends, and I've seen it in all these kind of environments Silence really works,
Mm.
coupled with a good listening ear, so listening to understand and listening for intention rather than listening to respond.
Mhm. Interesting. I mean, it takes years, I guess, to become a really good speaker, communicator, leader. Have you seen some other methods how people can adopt some of these new skills, especially technical people who usually focus on hard skills, and now suddenly they are becoming leaders and need to manage teams?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. So some of the language you use there around like new skills, I don't think an awful lot of this actually is about developing brand new skills. My belief is that we all have these skills in us and we use them all the time. We just don't think about it. So
That's
I should imagine almost every CTO listening to this now has had many, many thousands of moments where someone has really listened to him or her, has made someone angry, has inspired someone, has made someone cry, has made someone laugh, has corralled a group of people. Um, and we do this all the time without thinking when we go out, when we organize social events, when we have family events, when we work. But then someone puts a time and a date and a stage on it,
Mm.
and it all goes. And the goal here is to kind of go, well, how do we surface all this stuff that I can actually do without thinking in these situations where I'm under pressure? So a lot of this is about self-reflection and looking at yourself and going, okay, where does this already work for me? And what does that look like? And then how can I start practicing putting some of this into action here? So if you know that actually when you're with your when you're with your best friends, you're really animated and you're really colorful and you're really engaging and you feel really relaxed, then an activity to be okay, jot down what does that look like? What are my facial what are my facial expressions like? How do I use my body? What posture do I hold? What kind of dialogue am I delivering? And then have a look at what comes out in your paper and go, okay, for my next intention, I'm just going to try having this posture, or I'm just going to try speaking in this tone of voice, and just really bringing a playfulness to it, and
Mhm.
then watching to see what kind of response you get from other people. Does it engage or does it disengage? Is it a light spot or is it a dark spot? Um, yeah, so a lot about this is taking the weight out of this and bringing a lightness and a playfulness to it, which is how we generally act in our day-to-day lives.
And I guess this approach also works best when someone gives you feedback about how you perform during a meeting or presentation or some keynote speech. So, do you, as a coach, also sometimes visit your clients or a team where you give them feedback at work during their regular day?
Yeah, I do an awful lot of critiquing of keynote presentations. Um, and you need to keep that neutral language.
Mhm.
That's the most important thing. So we were talking about, excuse me, nonviolent communication and the language framework there. With this language framework being about observations rather than evaluations, and that same goes with feedback.
Mhm.
And for the way I like to give feedback is literally just twofold. Here are the strengths, here are the things that I think are great, and here are the things that I would recommend you improve. But before I give my feedback, I will always ask my clients to do their own self-reflection beforehand and create two lists. Number one, of what they think went well that they would like to repeat and kind of build on. And then second, what things would they change? And they write those two lists. I have them share them back to me, then I will give my own guidance. And I think feedback should be collaborative rather than, it's such a venom that can come with feedback sometimes. And
Mhm.
it triggers a lot of primal and young parts of us, particularly if there's any elements of status or hierarchy or power involved, like, oh, I have to get feedback from someone who's my senior or my boss or has more perceived experience. And delivering feedback, you have to be very careful because you can really make or break someone. When I have thousands of clients coming through and when I speak to them, it's like, okay, where does this come from? They think they're not good at speaking. It's like, well, once I got told this thing by my boss,
10
and that's
years
colored
ago.
their whole experience.
Mm.
Yeah. And it's like, well, what about these other 8 years of performing that you've got?
Mm.
And so we have to be very careful how we deliver feedback. And this is where it comes back to challenging conversations. Are you preparing for them? Are you asking yourself, what's the purpose of this conversation? What are the facts that I've got? What's a good outcome? What might the other person think the purpose is? What might they think? How might they respond? And really think about this before and then go into it informed.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you are right. These are not new skills. It's just the emphasis that we put on these skills because, as I mentioned, often the technical people start with programming languages. They need to learn frameworks and whatever tools and databases, and then at some point they need to shift focus to these soft skills that have been there but not prioritized. Are there any other skills that you have seen really successful people in leadership positions have?
Coaching.
Hmm.
But by far, I believe that's probably the single most effective skill as a leader. I mean, if you think about leadership transition, so moving from, to manager to leader, which are two slightly different roles, and or kind of like working into management even, you move from um, kind of like being in the jungle, chopping down the trees, as it were, to kind of getting up on a tower, going, right, that's the place we're going to go and chop.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to do that, there's a few things that need to come together. Like first of all, it's like you need to be able to let go and delegate, in order to delegate effectively, number one, you need to have the right team with the right skills. But number two, you need to be able to empower. Because if you're going to hand off your work to someone, to delegate to someone as a leader, and start to coalesce people around a vision, then you need to empower them.
Hmm.
And that's where coaching comes into it.
Yeah.
And there's a big difference between like a mentor and a consultant and a coach. So a consultant will come in and say, right, I'm the expert, this is what you need to do, and that's fine. There's a place for consultants.
Hmm.
A mentor kind of has that expert background, but they also kind of support a little bit more. But then a coach activates. They don't come in telling you what to do. They help you figure out how you're going to do it your way.
Hmm.
And for me, I believe that's probably the most crucial leadership skill, at least with teams in this kind of sector, is like, how do you empower? How do you activate? How do you coach people so they find the best solutions? Because ultimately, those, for want of a better phrase, on the shop floor are the ones who know how the shop floor work best.
Hmm.
The person who's sitting in that corner writing that line of code, they know that line of code better than you.
Hmm.
How can you activate them to find the best possible outcome rather than just telling them what to do? And I mean, how do we feel anyway when people just give us unsolicited advice? We hate it. You know, how do we feel when people ask our advice or what we think we can do? We love it.
True, true, true. Well, it's interesting that you phrase this as the most important skill, because I usually think about a coach as someone external, someone like you, for example. You are the speaking coach, right? Uh, but essentially, we are talking about the CTO being the coach for the people within the department, right?
Yeah. So think about coaching as a skill rather than a job title.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's not to say that you wouldn't also provide mentoring and guidance and setting a vision and building engagement. But I believe that having the skill of being able to coach effectively is crucial for a leader with a team, because then you unlock potential in a team rather than just telling them to do it your way, which is fine. And that might work in some situations. Here's my way, off you go. But I get far more excited about the idea of going, okay, I've done it this way for a long way. I'd really like to see what you guys have got to think about this as well. What do you think's a better way? And see what comes up and hear that and then activate them to go and do it, try it out, come up with a bloody prototype, give it a go, show me what you can do,
Mm.
and really empower. And that's a coaching mindset, that is.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And then do you see the difference between coaching and leadership in setting the vision and coaching as a means to get to that end state?
Yes. So there's a great book called Leadership Plain and Simple by I think it's Steve Radcliffe, and he says that there's the kind of three pillars. There's setting a vision, there's engaging, and then there's delivering.
Mhm.
And it's one of my favorite leadership books. It's so simple and it's a three-step process. I love them all the threes. And coaching probably sits in that second and third part around engagement and delivery. So you need to be able to set a vision, and you may use coaching to help collaborate on a vision. I spent 7 years working at an agency where we collectively within the agency set the company's vision. Twice a year we would all come together and co-design where we want to go. That could be a bit trickier and bigger organizations, and then you break it down. Okay, how do we set the department's vision or the team's vision? And it may be just like the vision is clear, the purpose is clear, the mission is clear. And then it's about, okay, how do we then engage people and deliver on that? And that's where coaching comes into it. But I wouldn't say it's distinct from leadership or setting a vision, but it definitely is more in the space of activating people and leading to action. But
Yeah,
without a
awesome.
clear vision, they're not going to know what they're being coached on.
True, true. Well, it's really interesting that you mentioned this as a skill, because I think a lot of people overlook it because they think it's someone else who should be coaching, not me as the technical leader. But it's very